I wanted to move on to, so this is a topic that I haven't really discussed in the podcast, all about kind of what the whole vision behind your podcast is with like women's health and like, women empowerment and just that whole picture. So one thing, so I listened to your episode with Elisa, and one thing she said that I thought was interesting, she's like, the term women empowerment has become like overused, and that reminded me of like the term, for example, mental health awareness. Everyone talks about mental health awareness and like women empowerment and so on. So I'm like, okay, if first of all, how would you define women empowerment in your own words? And two, if we don't want to use that term now, what should we be using instead? What would you say?
Good question. Very good question. Yes, the term women empowerment has been overused, but mainly because it's been commercialized, right? So as we discussed in the podcast with Elisa, it was made into slogan t-shirts and keychains, and every brand on the planet was like, I want to camp, because I did that when I was working in fashion. I did brand campaigns, and they would say, we would ask, what do you want? Like, women empowerment. Everyone wanted women empowerment, and essentially women empowerment became a way to sell you more products. So I was saying that is generally what happens with movements in the world. And like, I think we saw that a little bit with Black Lives Matters last year, right? It was what everyone was talking about. It was everywhere. And then, now where is it? And you'll often see posts on Instagram that say, Black lives still matter, even if we're not talking about it. And I guess that's maybe the result of the way the world is, the way the news cycle is, our attention span, social media, etc. So anyway, to come back to your question, yes, the word women empowerment has been overused, and there's something that always made me feel a little bit uneasy about the term women empowerment, because it's almost like women empowerment, the need to empower women, feels like it's an external thing. It's like, here are the women and we need to empower them because they cannot empower themselves. So it's let us help you, as opposed to it coming from the inside of this group of women, which is like a self-empowerment thing. But I mean, it's semantics, so it doesn't really matter. What term would I use? That's a good question. I think like what I often say, and what I've read as well, is that the goal is to help women make better informed decisions for themselves. So it's providing them with the information that they need to then make their own decisions. It's providing them with the platforms that they need. It's providing them with the environments that they need to then be able to decide, do I want to be a CEO or do I want to be a stay-at-home mom, given that I now have all this information, understanding, and support?
Yeah.
So I don't actually have a term that I would use, and I can't think of one now. If I do, I'll WhatsApp it to you. And your second question was, sorry?
So we were talking about how would you define it, which you just said, and then we talked about how would you rebrand it. So for you, it's about yeah. So it's not about, it is, you're empowering them through providing them with all the knowledge, those tools, the platforms, the environments to make those decisions, whatever they may be, right? But do you think sometimes, like, coming on to my next question, like, this is something that I think becomes, I think either the signals become mixed, or maybe the messaging kind of starts to change. What would you say is the difference between, like, when people say women empowerment and feminism? Are those two things the same thing, or are those two completely different like messages that people are like putting out? What would you say?
Feminism is a very intricate and sort of in-depth movement that has a huge history behind it, and there have been waves of feminism. I think we're maybe in the fourth wave of feminism right now, and each wave has had its own characteristics and its own demands and its own, driving forces. So I would say that feminism as a movement is a way, I don't want to say way bigger, but has a lot more depth, you know, like it's an anthropological, philosophical, political, you know, it has, it's like a web, you know, and now in the US they have, for example, intersectional feminism, and it's really, really like a very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say very heavy topic. That's not the right word. It's like it's a much deeper, deeper movement with roots that run, you know, decades deep, and a lot more nuanced than just female empowerment. I did want to say something though, and we kind of touched on it with Elisa on the podcast that I recorded with her, was that feminism, or let's say women empowerment, for example, looks different in different parts of the world. So, for instance, in the US, it's louder. It's has different demands and different faces because of where they are on their journey. In the Middle East, for example, it's completely different. You know, like we are faced with different obstacles, different challenges, different parameters, different realities. You know, like for example, in this, I mean, in Egypt, for example, we still have numbers like 99% of women have experienced sexual harassment. You know, these are like, this is a reality for us in the region. Honor killings are still happening in places like Jordan. They're enshrined in the law in places like, you know, Kuwait. There's an amazing organization called Abolish 153. And I actually had one of the founders on the podcast, and she was explaining how 153 is an article in the Kuwaiti Penal Code, and it basically states that if a man kills his wife or daughter or mother, whatever, and it's deemed like an honor killing, then his sentence, I can't remember, but it was like something like $15 was like the fine that he had to pay, or something like that. It's ridiculous. But these are, you know, things are changing, and there are amazing organizations out there that are doing a lot of work, but that is still a reality of life in the Middle East. And so how does that affect our definitions and understanding of, you know, furthering women's rights? So maybe in the US, you know, they're shouting on the rooftops that they want equal pay, but in the Middle East, we're still at a level where we're saying, we're in some communities, we're saying, you know, stop female genital mutilation, you know, and you're seeing rates of over like 90% of that in certain countries in the Arab world. So yes, so just to say, like, it's different, and I think it's very hard to apply that kind of, it's hard to apply these Western interpretations of, you know, words or values or whatever it is to our situation here, or these ideologies to our situation here. There's always a nuance to it. And so with goodness, just to bring it back, the way that I wanted to contribute to what was happening, or the way that I could think of bringing value, is to just present this platform to any woman who had a story to share with other women, who overcame something. So the podcast, we have two different types of guests. Let me just take it a step back. There's sort of like the experts, and then there's the real women's stories. So experts will be like, it'll be a doctor, a therapist, someone who is sharing, who is offering value through their expertise. And the other type of guests, like the more like me and you kind of, well, not you, sorry. Like, just I'm more used to having women on the other side of the camera, the mic. The other ones are just women who have experienced something, who have like grown through a personal experience, and are sharing lived advice. And it's very powerful to hear another woman's story and to hear how she went through it, whether it's like how she went through IVF, or how she fell from a climbing wall, broke every bone in her body, and used positive affirmations to start walking again. Like, whatever it is, there is power in that. And the goal was for these women to always either be Middle Eastern or come from the Middle East. Sorry, be Middle Eastern or live in the Middle East, because then the stories are relevant and accurate to, they're accurate and relevant to what other women here are going through.
And I think you made a very good point that, and like you guys discussed in the podcast, and I didn't consider that feminism and all these and like women empowerment, all these kind of things are so different across different cultures, and that's not something that I personally ever considered before. But like you correctly said, like some things in the States, for example, that might be more liberal, or might be more conservative on here, you know, different cultures, backgrounds, societies. So it's very hard, like I said, to get a common ground that all women around the world can be like, okay, we're all on this, and we build, like, this is the foundation that we build from, because everyone's on a different level and a different playing field. But what do you think? I'm curious, because I think some people have misconceptions about feminism. So what do you think some of those are? Because I think sometimes
some of the misconception.
Yeah, because I think sometimes maybe it can come with like a negative connotation or something like that. So I'm curious, what do you think some of the misconceptions are that maybe people aren't like understanding?
I don't think that I would be the best person to speak of that, because I haven't done enough research and looked deep enough into feminism and the misconceptions that people have about it. But I mean, one thing that always cracks me up as and comes across as like the most basic surface level like understanding / misunderstanding of feminism is when someone says, oh, you're a feminist, then I'm not going to hold the door for you, or like this idea that, you know, but like I do think men should hold the door for women, and I hold the door for men, and I hold the door for other women. It's common courtesy. It's like basic, you know, humanity. It has nothing to do with any of that. So that's always one that cracks me up. But I think people think it's like burning bras and like not shaving your underarms, and like those are like really like it's a very surface misunderstanding of feminism. But I don't think I can do justice to your question without looking into it further.
That's fair. I respect the honesty. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, definitely.
No.
I think I learned that from podcasting. It's better to say like that you don't know than to like go down a 40-minute ramble.
But saying you don't know is perfectly fine. That's one thing I remember in when I was selling. They're like, listen, if you don't know, say you don't know. Don't try to like come up with some bullshit on the spot. People can like sniff it out. Everyone's gonna know. But the point. Sorry, go ahead.
I did want to add something, which is that, as we were saying, like there's various ways that you can get interested and involved in the experience of being a woman in today's world, and where there may be some injustices or where there may be some things that just like don't really make sense. So it could be on a political level. You can get involved in, for example, on when it comes to a professional level, are women being paid as much as men? Are they having the same opportunities? You could look at it from a perspective, you know, I have a friend who works in sexual and reproductive health. And so what she concerns herself with is the fact that there's very little access, and what impact does that have on women? And one thing that I was very interested in for a long time myself, and also because of my personal journey, was all the marketing and messaging around women's bodies and the beauty standards that are expected of women, and you know how media plays into that, and how social media plays into that, and the development of eating disorders and body dissatisfaction amongst women. And there definitely is like the numbers of eating disorders in men are on the rise as well. So that's not to negate that experience, but I think it's very evident, at least to me and to the experts I've spoken to, that the messaging has been targeting women for a much longer time when it comes to like what their bodies should look like, and what, you know, physically what they should look like. And that's something that I'm super interested in. But yes, there are different and many ways to come at this problem. And you just kind of find the sliver that is of interest to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very good point to talk about, because like you said, there's so many layers and there's so many different angles that need to be addressed, you know, for like for everything to change in the long term. All these points at some point are going to need to be addressed. So like you said, find the one that matters to you, the one that you're interested in, and that's the way you get in. So I think that's a very important point to remember.